Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast, where we talk about everything dog. Q&As with veterinarian professionals, rescue operators, everyday topics. We cover everything dog on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media on both Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Now here's that next episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast. This is your host, Brittany, and today we are talking to Dr. Pepe Hernandez. He is a behavioral neuroscientist and a certified dog trainer out of New York City, and he's bringing a science-backed approach to training. So Pepe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So your background is interesting because you have a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, and that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And then to bridge that with dog training is so interesting. So tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about your background and like how you ended up in the sphere of dog training.
Yeah, so basically, I was a lifelong lover of animals since I was a kid, and I wanted to be a veterinarian for the most part of my life. But then I got kind of pulled into biochemistry and psychology and that kind of stuff, and that culminated in the eventual pursuit of my degree in neuroscience, right? Which is kind of a mixture of all those fields. And that mixed with my love of dogs was perfect, right? So I studied learning and memory in graduate school, which focus on all the mechanisms by which memories are acquired and stored. There's a remarkable overlap between organisms in terms of how we learn and remember things. So all the same molecules are involved and the same types of cells, all that stuff. And so it was this kind of like a natural progression through after I finished my research field to take on dog training, right? I love dogs and I love the learning and memory aspect of training. So yeah, it was a perfect fit.
So do you feel like with your background, your training is a little bit different than I'll say average, even though dog trainers are all so different, but do you feel like that shapes you a little bit differently?
Yeah, because like the behavioral neuroscience is really like kind of the study of how the brain produces behavior, how it like intakes all the environmental stimuli, processes it, and allows us to choose a method of or an action. So like when I see a dog, I don't look at their behavior as simply good or bad, like as some other people might, or dog owners even themselves might, but I look at it as information. So for me, like dog trains, that's what fascinates me is just that, how all of this it applies to both dogs and humans, and it really affects my approach um, because I take this more in-depth kind of approach to and like assess behavior and how what brain state the animal is actually in, rather than just what we ultimately see in just terms of behavior.
Right, right. Yeah, you're going much more in depth than what a lot of dog trainers might, right? And kind of
Mhm.
understanding those mechanisms and how they work. Um, so one thing we mentioned off air, and I want to jump right into it, is the role of consistency and timing in whether a dog responds or tunes you out. Because you and I have seen dogs either not respond or it just seems like they're ignoring their owner, right? It seems like they
Mhm.
don't even know that their owner is calling for them or giving them a command. So let's talk about consistency and timing and the role that that plays.
Sure, sure. You're right. It's extremely common. Like, so when a dog seems to ignore a cue, it usually doesn't mean that the dog's being stubborn or defiant or even disrespectful. But more often it means that there's like one of three things are happening, right? The cue is unclear or it's undertrained in that context, right? The context just being whatever environment that they're in. Or the
Hmm.
cue can be competing with stronger reinforcers, such as smells or movement or other dogs, food on the ground, or even, access to something exciting.
Hmm.
So if the dog's in the wrong emotional state to respond, such as being fearful or frustrated or even overexcited, or like in the presence of his arch nemesis, for example, like he's going to be extremely hard to reach with a cue alone, right? So if they're in an emotional state, he may not care or give, that you're asking him to sit. And so that's why I like to reframe the idea of ignoring. I might say, oh, the owner might say, oh, he's blowing me off, or he listens perfectly at home. Why not now?
Right.
All right. And my response is usually that he may cue, the cue at home, but that doesn't mean he understands it in every environment. And they don't really generalize very well too to different environments automatically. So that's kind of the common reason why cues fall apart. Like I said, he may be able to sit or come beautifully in the living room, but once you take him into the real world, that behavior can completely disappear.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite, it's astounding sometimes, like, people are baffled by that. But, if you haven't taught the cue in the environment with the same level of stress or distractions, then it may not be successful. So that's why we always start like training in our living room, right? Where there's low
Hmm.
distraction levels. And then we progress to like higher and higher distractions. So from there, maybe to the elevator, to the lobby, in your apartment building, and then to the sidewalk. And then maybe later to the dog park. But we never go from living room to dog park if we want any like chance of success, right? It's just too much of a
Right.
jump. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I know you see a lot of reactive dogs, anxious dogs, fearful dogs. And so I have a dog that you could still label him as reactive.
Hmm.
When I first got him, he was labeled as aggressive, and that was just
Hmm.
a mislabel. But he is reactive in a lot of ways. And so when we first started to train him, like you said, in the living room, perfect sit, perfect down. But the second we got out that door,
Hmm.
nothing. And
Yep.
he wasn't ignoring me, but there were just so many other stimuli around
Yeah.
that, I mean, he wasn't even hearing me. And
Right.
so um, I, I don't know if you see a difference or if you can kind of call it out whenever you are working on consistency and timing. Does that look different for a dog that's maybe reactive or anxious versus a dog that's not? I don't want to say a normal dog because what's a normal dog,
Mhm.
but
Right.
a dog that's maybe not anxious or maybe not reactive. Does that look kind
Yeah.
of different in training?
It kind of does. In the basic essence of it is the same. Like when you're teaching a dog a new trick or command, right? There's four steps really to that process. And the first one is to give the cue, and then we wait a little bit. And then if they don't know it by cue alone, right, verbal cue alone, then we give them a gesture, a lure, right? We lure them to place to kind of translate between human language and dog action, right? So that kind of forces their butt down when we go above their head with a treat and when we ask to sit. So once their butt hits the ground and they do that sit, that's when timing is of essence, right? And so we need to mark that behavior with what we call a marker, and it just
Hmm.
marks the occasion that the dog actually did what you asked. So
Right.
when you eventually come in with the fourth step, which is reward, it's going to be paired with that marker word, and that's going to be timed specifically to end as close as possible to when their butt hit the ground, so that more behaviors don't um, um, become acted out. If we mark late and we reward late, then it's the more chance we're going to get like a fuzzy behavior that the dog's not
Right.
going to quite know what we wanted them to do. So, in terms of reactive dogs, is that process even more critical? Probably because there's more distractions, they're more vigilant, they're scanning the room, and you're trying to bust through all of that when you're trying to train them, right? And so
Hmm.
we work really hard with reactive dogs to lower their arousal before we even start training. Right, so it's a
Okay.
very quiet room, and just we do practice exercises to like sniffing and to bring them down and decompress them even more, so we have a better chance at training. And the same thing is like with medication. That's kind of the goal with dogs on meds. A lot of people are kind of resistant to it, saying, "Oh, we'll make them robots or sedated," but that's
Hmm.
exactly what I don't want. I don't want them
Right.
sedated. I just want the noise in the brain to go away so that they're able to be trained and learn. Right.
Right. And a lot of dogs that are anxious or reactive, a lot of it could be fear. And I think we have a hard time reading it as fear, and we can't understand it as fear because we're like they're safe. In our mind, we're like the dog is safe, they should feel safe. But they're fearful. And so what's happening in the brain and in the dog's body whenever they're scared?
Hmm. Well, so that's kind of a huge question, right? And it encompasses a lot of different brain systems and a lot of different, hormone systems and whatnot. But it's just important to know, like, to start that fear isn't drama, right? They're not being defiant, and it's not stubbornness, and it's a survival system that all the dogs have, tightly ingrained in their DNA, right? So at its most basic level, fear is the body's way of preparing an animal to respond to danger. True for humans and dogs and pretty much any animal. Snails like show like reactions to noxious substances, right? So for fear to exist, it helps the animal survive. So if a dog hears like a loud noise, or an unfamiliar dog's rushing at him or something, or he feels trapped, the nervous system can shift into like this defensive state. where the dog's brain is no longer asking, "Oh, what cue did my owner just say?" But he's like, "Am I safe?" Right?
Mhm.
So we might think they should be safe, but they're not really on that same page, right? And their
Right.
brain might have already shifted into a different state. And so that distinction matters. They're not really being difficult, they're just prioritizing safety.
Right.
Um, right? So, neurologically, that it involves, like I said, multiple brain systems working together. And there's one brain region in particular called the amygdala, which is a processing center in the brain that really is like a fear detector. In humans, like if you're shown like a bunch of different faces with different expressions on them, your amygdala will light up in activity when they see the fearful ones, like wide eyes and
Mm.
stuff like that. Things that designate fear. So really in dogs, we do the same thing. We can look for body language signs that they are feeling afraid. That can be anything from like lip licking, whale eye, the hackles on their back might be standing up, straight up, and all kinds of different responses like yawning, stuff that they shouldn't be doing unless they're tired. Um,
Mhm.
so there's like a lot of signs. But, yeah, and there's like then there's also hormones that affect, fear, and those also in turn affect learning and memory. So if your dog is really afraid, they may not be able to learn and remember the way we expect normally.
So I have, another rescue because I have
Uh-huh,
a bunch here. I have
mhm,
another rescue who he came to us very anxious, very, very fearful, to
mhm,
the point where anytime someone came into our house, he just shut down. That was it. You were not getting through to him. He no longer heard you. And we
mhm,
ended up having to do a board and train. And I had never done a board and train before. But that was kind of interesting because it took her several weeks to kind of get through to him, to
mhm,
signal like, "Hey, you're safe, you're able to do this," and they would have little not setbacks, but they would
mhm,
try to take these things out in public, he would shut down, that fear would kinda
mhm,
be there, and so it was just, like, consistently working through that, and that was the first time I experienced that. I had never rescued a fearful dog, an
mhm,
anxious dog to that extent where they would just shut down in certain spaces, and
mhm,
he certainly still has that now, and it's interesting to see. I can usually read his body language. His ears might kinda, like, go back and kinda, like, touch in the back,
mhm,
or he, like, curls his tail under, kind of, like, tucks his butt, and that's when I know, I'm like, "Okay, he's afraid, he's
mhm.
kinda shut down, he's not going to quite get what I'm giving him as far as a cue," and so it is interesting how that can impact his behavior because in my mind, I wanna be like, "Oh, he's not listening," but the reality is that he just has so many other things going on that, he can't listen.
Mhm.
So, whenever you are working with a fearful dog, are there extra steps to kinda get through that allows them to kind of train things to memory and to, like, memorize it, so to speak?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's many extra steps that we kind of go through to make sure that the training is more effective. And we usually try to start by addressing the root cause, right? So what is the trigger? What is causing them to be afraid? What's at the base of all of that? And let's say your dog's just afraid of another dog. We can
Mhm,
simplify it. So when we try to do, there's a couple processes we use. It's called counter conditioning and desensitization, and that involves keeping the dog under threshold, right? So the threshold is at the distance at which a dog will start to react, lunge, bark, fold their tail under, whatever, show
mhm,
all these responses in response to a trigger that it's afraid of. And so we have to work under that level, right? When they're responding and still listening to us, right? Still taking treats, still, taking cues.
right,
If it's over that, we're done, right? Because now they're not listening anymore, right? They checked out.
right,
So yeah, we do all these. We make sure where the distance is far enough and that they feel safe enough, but that they can still see the trigger, right? And so
mhm,
then we can begin working that way. So we have them look at the trigger and then we treat them, right? And we're doing that because the normal reaction is to see trigger, get anxious, and then respond or cower, be defensive or do whatever, right? Attack or whatever they're feeling. But we want to replace that with like, see the dog, see the trigger, give the reward, feel good, and then associate that dog in the future with feeling good. Right. So we're trying
mhm,
to slowly replace that negative feeling with a positive one. And that's kind of the essence of like counter conditioning. But it takes a while, it takes a long time, but it can really affect like their overall display of fear and their symptoms and their
mhm.
ability to learn, right?
Right. And much of what you said leans into positive reinforcement, which there's always
Mhm,
a time and a place for positive reinforcement.
mhm.
And so talk to us, how does positive reinforcement work from a brain perspective, from like how the dog's brain is working?
Right. So positive reinforcement works because the brains are designed to learn from consequences, right? And they form associations. So in positive reinforcement training, a dog performs a behavior, and then something valuable follows, and then that outcome is what tells the brain, "Oh, that worked. Do it again." Right.
Hmm.
So positive reinforcement teaches the dog which behaviors are worth repeating. It gives the dog information and it builds behavior. It can strengthen behaviors that we want to see again, such as checking in with your owner, walking on a loose leash, for example, settling, disengaging from triggers, etc. Um, and that contrasts like to aversive techniques, right? Which are like choke chains and leash corrections and yelling and screaming at your dog. These approaches tend to suppress behavior, right? So they don't work against the brain in terms of how, chemicals like dopamine and different brain systems all work together to detect behaviors and their consequences, and then act to reinforce those and repeat those behaviors. The aversive training mechanisms work against that because they tend to suppress behavior, not build behavior, right? So
Hmm.
that's why we really stress, using positive reinforcement because it creates, a confidence that dogs don't have, when they're stressed out. And is all different brain systems are involved at that point. But, so yeah, in terms of like one interesting thing is like with dopamine being this neurotransmitter signal that we always used to associate with reward, right, or feeling good or that rush you get. This modern neuroscience has really kind of like put that on end a little bit. In that we now know that dopamine is really involved in this error detection network in the brain. So when dogs expect a reward, for example, well, when they get a reward initially, then yeah, dopamine is off the charts, right? But
Hmm.
then it changes. Then that activity starts to go down, and then it only becomes reactive active when a cue is associated with that reward. So now dopamine neurons fire when they get that cue in expectation of the reward, not in response to the reward. So
Mm.
this is then it compares like, oh, if the reward was better than we thought, then dopamine will be higher. If it's lower than we thought, then the activity of those neurons goes down. So the brain is using these differences as an error detection network, and that's really what propels learning. So it's kind of an interesting little caveat on like what dopamine's doing and how positive reinforcement training actually helps us feeds into that network, that process versus aversive training, which goes against.
Hmm. And then, so I mentioned my rescue dogs, and they're all different, right? They all
Mhm.
have different backgrounds, different experiences. We don't know their genetic makeup. And so I think a lot of people have a problem with the rescue dog. They had a family dog growing up, and then they go to rescue one. They're like, she's different. She's not doing this. She's harder to train. She's XYZ. And along with that, you hear the general rule of 333, 3 days, three
Mhm.
weeks, 3 months, which in my
Mhm.
experience, it could be longer than 3 months. But nevertheless, talk about a little bit what's going on neurologically
Mhm.
and emotionally when a rescue dog comes into a new environment, whenever they come into their new home. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, imagine being dropped into like a foreign country, right? Uh where you have don't know the language or there's no map and you don't know who anyone is or where to eat or where to pee, you know what I mean? So you're just lost, right? So that's
Right.
kind of akin to what like a new dog is feeling in this whole new system that of your home and your rules and your ways, right? So they might be thinking to themselves, kind of like, where am I and who are these people and when do I eat? Where do I sleep? Where do I pee? Am I safe even? I mean, they
Right.
don't know,
Right.
right? And so what happens if they make a mistake? A lot of them have been abused or punished, and so they're just on eggshells, right? So
Mhm.
this is kind of why accidents can happen in those first few days, right? They don't know where to pee. They're just stressed out. It's high stress.
Yeah.
It's not because they're bad or being stubborn, or trying to spite anyone, but they're just overwhelmed. So neurologically, many newly adopted dogs, they're in survival mode, right? And so they may do things like they may like shut down, or they may be exactly the opposite. They may be hyperactive, but
Mhm.
underneath the hood, they're all just afraid bunch of nerves, right? So they just don't know what to expect. So it really just takes this time of decompression. And during those first few days, we want to just really let them chill out. We don't want them going to dog parks or meeting 100 of our friends, and
Right.
to let this kind of all catch up, right?
Yeah, that decompression period is so important, and so many people skip it because they're like, "I got a new dog, we're going to the dog
Yeah,
park tomorrow," or, "Oh, I'm gonna take him over to see all my friends at the beach," and it's like, no, that dog needs
right.
to just chill,
Mhm.
learn their environment, learn that they're safe, and, I mean, that could take I truly think that that could take up to months, depending on the dog, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
don't know, would you agree that there are dogs that it could take them several months to truly, like, decompress and feel safe?
Yeah, indeed. It's all dogs are different, like you said, and it depends on their history. Like, what kind of issues are they coming to us with? And unfortunately, it's always most often a big black box, right? The rescue people don't know, or it's not exactly clear, and so we just don't know what kind of traumas they've experienced. But that's not to say all of them are like that, right?
Right.
They're not all abused or whatever, but everyone has their quirks, we'll say, and so it can take some dogs a while to settle in, and other dogs might be quicker. It all depends on resilience, and it's can also depend on genetics. So it's kind of a toss up what we'll see. But that's kind of why we are very pliable, and during those first 3 months, right? We kind of take things
Mhm.
as they come, and we don't get hard set on rules. And in the first few days, we don't do things like demand, that they learn 17 new tricks, right? Like,
Right.
you want them to play the name game and understand what their name is now, and, like, just do simple things like get them predictable schedules and walk
Yeah.
them at the same time every day and give them food at the same time, because that comforts them. They love that structure. So that's
Mhm.
kinda what the beginning should be about, right?
Yeah. If someone does rescue a dog, regardless of age, breed, any of that, do you have a recommendation of like when to reach out to a trainer? Like someone like
Mhm,
yourself, let's say, someone in New York City rescues a dog, they want to get a trainer. What's that
mhm.
timeline, the ideal timeline for you?
Yeah, I would say, reach out like a couple of weeks at minimum ahead of time, just so that, you can get the trainer on board, decide if they, you're like how they do their jobs. And they can be a valuable source of information to you, in terms of like how to handle those first few days and what the dog
Yeah.
might need, right? And what you should be working on or not working on. And so being armed with all that information before you get the dog is super important. So even if it's just like an hour-long consultation with a trainer, that can be like invaluable to you, and just reduce your stress big time over what to expect and and be able to handle any kind of like odd things that might happen. Um, but then again, it's important to follow up too, because what we just got done saying, behaviors evolve during that first, especially 3 weeks, right?
Hmm.
Some behaviors will emerge and some will kind of dissipate as they get settled in. So we don't really know what we're going to get until 3 weeks to 3 months. And so you also want to do like a post adoption consultation, right? So that the
Right.
trainer can be like, "Oh, those are some red flags. That's a warning sign. Let's work on this and nip it in the bud." Otherwise, you could be dealing with some big problems later on, that could have been trained pretty easily earlier. So you want to involve
Hmm.
that trainer as early as you can, and maintain communication, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. There's one rescue I've worked with and one breeder I've worked with where you already had to have a trainer on board prior to
Hmm.
getting the dog. And I know it's tough. A lot of people complain that a lot of rescues have all these different criteria.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, I just think it's a lot of rescues just wanting to set that dog up for success. And
Uh-huh.
so if you are a responsible owner, it makes sense to go ahead, find you a trainer that you're gonna work well with, that
Uh-huh.
fits your whatever you're looking for, right? That fits your schedule, your budget, your style of training that you are foreseeing. But I
Uh-huh.
think it makes sense. And so, like you said, having that consult before you even get the dog, whether it's a rescue, a shelter, or whatever it might be.
Uh-huh.
So I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're having a baby and you want to read the baby books before the baby's born. You don't want the
Yeah.
baby to be born and then be like, I got to read this book really quick. How do I change a diaper?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and to that point, I'm working on a little back project where it has to do exactly with providing these services to adopters, who are in the training or the adoption process. And
Mhm.
it's to reach out early, give them a lot of online references for free, get them discounted, services, because let's, face it, like a lot of people choose the adoption route because, the dogs from breeders are super expensive, right? And not
Yeah.
reachable by a lot of people. And some just want to, do the right thing and rescue kind of a dog in need.
Right.
So there's a lot of different financial needs out there. And so we're trying to like accommodate some of that by providing free consults and then discounted services afterwards so that we reduce the rehoming of these dogs and the euthanasia rates. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. So, for anyone listening, are there any takeaways? It could be 3, 4, 5 that every dog owner could start doing to improve their dog's behavior or to improve, like, communication with their dog.
Yeah, there's a bunch. Um, but yeah, so I mean, one is like, I think don't be afraid to reward your dog, right? I don't know what it is, but like as a trainer, it's kind of always surprised me, like how many people just feel like not, oh, I can't give them too many, I don't want to give them too many treats. And it's not really about their weight. I'm like, well, then just don't feed them as much, right? So it's not really
Right,
that.
right, cut back on the food,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So, but I don't know what it is about our society or culture or what, but we're easy to criticize and to punish a dog for like, we're yanking them back saying no and this and that. But we're not the flip side of the coin, we're not saying, oh, good job for doing that. We're like, maybe because we'd be saying it all day. I don't know, hopefully. But we really need to remember that in order to get the behaviors you want, you have to let the dog know somehow. And so capturing good behavior is what it's called. Like you see your dog doing something good that you didn't ask for, just drop them a little treat. It could be a kibble, whatever.
Mhm,
And just to let them know, hey, that's what I like. That's what I like of you. And then those behaviors, the frequency of those behaviors will increase. So you're
right,
going to just, by definition, spend less time, castigating them or chastising them, and then more time praising them. And so, yeah, so, go ahead and give them that treat, be generous and you're going to improve trust and your relationship with your dog and they'll behave better for you.
mhm,
So that's one thing I can think of off the top of my head. Other ones are, let's see, how about enrichment, right? I think so many people think their dogs had all the training they need and they know everything and they've been through puppy and puppy two and adolescent one and two and they're done, right? But
mhm,
how many of us how many of us as humans, have like lifelong learning ambitions, or we're always changing careers or we have the quest for knowledge and for thirst for knowledge and dogs have that too. It's mentally stimulating for them. So if you have this agility or a nose work enrichment class available or just extra training of some sort, go ahead and do that for your dog. It'll break up their day, reduce boredom, and it'll be a good bonding moment for you. And you'll have a lot of fun too, most of the time.
mhm,
So yeah, so enrichment's another really good one to do. And that can also really help behavioral problems. If your dog has
right,
behavior problems, like get them that agility, get them that sniffing class, teaches them focus and confidence and communication with you as an owner, is immensely valuable tool, especially for reactive dogs. I use it all the
yeah,
time in my reactive dog practice. Yeah.
mhm,
Um, and then I guess the last one I could recommend would be has to do with loose leash walking, right? And
mm.
tangentially to the retractable leashes, which I can't stand.
There's
um,
so many things that happen on retractable leashes. It is rare that
right?
someone can use a retractable leash. Like, the
Yeah,
everyday dog owner, don't buy one. Do not buy
right.
one.
Right, stay away.
Yeah.
If you're not, the dog, most people, they let him go like 20, 30 feet ahead of them. And, this has happened to a client of mine. He was, coming towards the dog owner and their dogs were stretched out on their leash. Uh, and as they were passing, it was fine. And then 2 seconds later, he turned around, his dog was getting attacked by these dogs that ran
Oh, wow.
backward on the leash towards them and started attacking my client's dog. So
Mm,
when you don't have control over your dog, they're 20 feet ahead of you and they're free to move back and forth, like anything can happen and does,
right,
right? So it can be really dangerous. It can be dangerous for the dog as well because an off-leash dog could run up and attack your dog, and he's 20 feet
right,
away from you. You got to catch up. It's too late. You lose an ear by then.
right.
Um, and then lastly, I mean, you can trip people. I mean, either you're
Yeah, I
clotheslining.
used to see that all the time. When I lived in
Yeah.
New York, there was a part of Central Park I would walk in, and I'll never forget this guy had a retractable leash, probably a solid 20 feet out,
Hmm.
and this lady was running. She didn't see it, you really couldn't see it very well, and she tripped, and she actually got hurt, like, they had to call
Yeah.
the paramedics, and
Oh my gosh.
I'm just like, that could have been prevented, you know?
Right, right. As you know, why I don't know why that has to be like that either, they can do just as much exploring, like, 6 feet away from you than they
Right.
can 20, so
Yeah, exactly.
right,
And
right.
another thing that I would see a lot living in a bigger city is if people had retractable leashes and their dogs were too far out in front, they would get a hold of anything on the ground. So if there were
Right.
like chicken wings or like, like bones and
Mhm.
scraps, the bagel store had thrown out a bag of bagels. They're already halfway through that bag by the time you get up to them. I
Right.
saw that all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Or, going on an escalator. People would kind of like be dragging the retractable leash and the dog would be still at the top of the escalator. And you're like, what are you doing? Like,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anytime I see a retractable leash, I almost always see a problem immediately. Like, it's
Yeah,
almost
me
never a
too.
smooth interaction, you know?
Right, and to make it worse, they're probably on the phone too, like, not even
Yeah,
looking, So
right,
just classic
exactly.
New York, behavior, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So,
yeah.
Pepe, you have a lot of resources on your website, and you also have different like classes that you offer. Tell us a little bit, and everyone can go check out your website too, but tell us a little bit about what you offer and like what people can find on the website.
Sure. So, like I mentioned before, I have a large reactive dog training kind of program. And the pinnacle of that is called the Reactive Resilience program. And that's kind of where we use agility to channel a dog's excess energy in response to triggers through some sort of like either parkour, kind of like on the street agility.
Mhm.
But we started in the gym, right, with the real equipment and all that. And it's just an amazing way to like, give dogs a different outlet because a lot of dogs don't like just to sit and freeze while a trigger walks by, right? They're movement-based dogs, and so this gives them
Right.
some sort of, like, movement-based therapy to, like, process their tension. Um,
Mhm.
and so you can find and read all about that online. I also offer basic puppy services, because all training kind of starts with puppies and sets them up for life, as well as, obviously, agility and nose work classes for enrichment, and any kind of, like, private training that you need to resolve any kind of issues at home that have to do with, like, home environment, problems, right? So, uh,
Mhm.
crowded sidewalks, elevator issues, lobby issues, stuff like that happen at the home. Yep.
And you have in-person and virtual training,
Mhm.
is that correct?
Yep, yep. We also do virtual training as well. That was a lot more popular during like the COVID era kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people just can't travel, or have a busy schedule and need an odd, flexible time, and so it can be really good for that. Or if they lie outside my travel area, off in Brooklyn somewhere, like they still want the help. Yeah, so we can work out
Yeah.
usually virtually too. Yeah.
So where can people find you? Your, website, social media, all of that?
So website is at pjhdogtraining.com. And same with the social media, Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Well,
Mhm.
Pepe, thank you for joining us today and giving us some of this information. I'm sure that you could have went really deep and gave us some very scientific
Yeah.
terms, but thankfully you kept it very what's the word? Very easy for us to digest. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the Canine Culture Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any recommendations, any topics that you'd like to hear, if you know of any guests that would be good for the show, or if you yourself want to be a guest, please reach out to us. Send us an email at canineculturepodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message on social media. Thank you for listening, and please share this with any of your dog-loving friends.